I'd like to welcome everybody to this afternoon's partner webinar with Empower Business Solutions. We have a quite detailed and involved session lined up this afternoon, but before we begin, just a few usual housekeeping points. The session is being recorded for on-demand access later on, and the presentation and audio without the questions will be made available on the MEUC website. In terms of your engagement today, there'll be a time for questions, and you can either add your question to the Q&A section at any point, and it will be picked up at the appropriate time. Additionally, you can also raise your hand. You will then be asked to unmute and ask your question. Please, if you could also state your name and company, that would be helpful. So with that, I think we're ready to kick off if Richard isn't sort of making any groans and yawns when he's stretching.
Sorry about that. I've got a bad shoulder to try and pick something
maybe mute Richard will be good.
I'll die quietly. Don't worry. I'll mute now.
So I think with that we're ready to kick off, and I'd like to pass across to Vish Sharma, Head of Power Purchase Agreements at Empower Business Solutions, to take you through today's content headed up as Corporate Power Purchase Agreements, key to delivering our clean power ambition. So Vish, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin, and welcome all to this MEUC webinar on Corporate Power Purchase Agreements, or CPPAs. As Robin said, I'm Vish and I head up Empower Business Solutions PPA business. So let's jump straight in. So if we go to the next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of what I'll cover today, I think firstly it's important that we put the Corporate Power Purchase Agreement discussion in the context of what's going on in the wider energy market. So we'll do that. Because the two are closely linked. We'll then look in a bit more detail at what is a CPPA, and actually what makes them attractive to both generators and to consumers. And then finally, we'll then take a look a bit closer at how you go about entering into a CPPA, turning something that some or many would consider to be complex into something achievable for your business. Okay, so that's what we'll go through today. So let's jump in then, and we'll start with the market context. Actually, we skip on, I think, a couple of slides. Thank you. This is the one. Fab. Right. Okay. Well, yeah. Wow. I mean, we could just spend the next 90 minutes just stuck on this slide in terms of like what is going on in the energy market today. And I'm not even going to touch on REMA as well, which has also had a massive impact. I was just going to pick on kind of two major announcements from government, which I think link well to the topic of CPPAs. So I'll start actually by going back to December 2024. And hopefully most of you have read the government's Clean Power 2030 plan. If you haven't, go find it on the government website. Have a read of that. It's a really ambitious document. Okay, and yeah, you can see the stats on there in terms of the ambition in such a short space of time, in terms of doubling, trebling, quadrupling the amount of various capacity of different technologies in such a short space of time. But it is fantastic that we've got that ambition in the UK. Okay, so that's really important. And whilst we've got to accelerate quickly now, we have made great strides. When I started in the energy industry back in 2000, I think maybe 3 to 4% of the annual generation a year came from renewable sources. For the calendar year that's just finished of 2024, the last full calendar year, we actually saw 51% of the generation in the UK came from renewable sources. That is the first time in our GB history that actually the majority of generation that was generated in the UK was actually from renewables. And obviously we are now through our Clean Power 2030 ambition trying to accelerate that up to 95% carbon free. So obviously that includes nuclear as well. So we're not trying to move from 51% to 95%, because you've also got to factor in that that our nuclear generation forms part of that 95% that we're aiming for as GB. And then also following that, in the summer, a couple of months ago, actually, we also had the Clean Energy Industries Sectors Plan, a bit of a mouthful, which again gave further government measures to support our ambition, including doubling clean energy investments to over 30 billion a year by 2035, pumping in another 700 million into GB energy, and also obviously looking at how we're going to tackle reducing grid connection times and project prioritization as we try to connect so much more renewable generation to the grid, and that will be via the Clean Energy Mission Control. And also finally, the 14.2 billion pound government investment into Sizewell C. And it also went wider as well, that paper, in terms of, having a look at, ensuring that we have the right skills, regional jobs in the right places to actually build these new projects, such as offshore wind farms. So yeah, really looking across the whole supply chain. So I guess this kind of sets the scene of this huge ambition that we've got to shift our generation picture in such a short space of time. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so then let's bring this now back to what this actually means then for consumers and generators, and linking it back to CPPA. So if we start with kind of themes that are driving CPPAs for consumers, I mean, I think one of the key events over the last 5 years was the price shock that we saw in 2022 post Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the electricity price shock that was driven through a gas price shock, and seeing our UK energy prices on quadruple in the blink of an eye, and so I think that's brought stable prices into sharp focus and predictable prices for what many household consumers as well, but for businesses in particular. We've also got this factor of an increased focus on traceable clean energy. So the Greenhouse Gas Protocol is looking to revise their Scope 2 reporting standards, and to tighten up renewable power accounting standards to give them greater credibility. So we've got that looming on the horizon as well, which is another factor why businesses are looking at PPAs and CPPAs. So we'll come back to this theme as well in a little while. And then I think really consumers, domestic and businesses, really looking to support greater energy security. And by that, what I mean by energy security is removing our exposure to those global shocks that we saw in 22 and on into 23, and transitioning away from a reliance on gas being the marginal price, and setting the price for the UK. Because look, don't forget, Russia actually probably supplies less than 5% of the gas that arrives into the UK, but yet it impacted 100% of the electricity price, because we have a marginal price system. So to move away from that, as well as at the heart of our clean power strategy, as well as obviously it being good for the planet. So that's kind of broad themes of why we've seen uptake and interest, and why CPPAs have been a good fit from a consumer angle. And if we go to the next slide, please, let's look at it from the generators angle as well, because obviously it takes two to transact. So from an energy generator's perspective, there's probably a few key things to say. So firstly, I think we have to acknowledge that the CFD has been broadly a successful replacement for RO in terms of driving new renewable projects, but we have had some setbacks. Okay, so we had round 5. So the auctions have generally happened every year, and they're called rounds. So AR, it's like the AR1, AR5, AR6. We just had AR6, but the last round, AR5 of the auction, was a bit of a disappointment. We saw no offshore wind farms awarded a CFD, and that's because you bid into the auction and the guaranteed price from the government was just too low, so generators didn't feel that they can make the projects work, and so nothing was awarded. However, we then had the following year AR6, so round 6 of the auction, and we saw a good bounce back in terms of generators securing a contract for difference, contract with the government, especially solar developers. Were really successful. Some attractive prices were on offer for that. So the CFD has been broadly successful, but it's had a few bumps in the road, and we've now got round 7 just underway, and that's expected to close around Q1 next year. It was delayed a bit because of REMA, which we said we weren't going to talk about, but that delayed the round. So rather than an annual round, we've kind of ended up with like an 18-month gap between rounds. So from a generator's perspective, a CFD is really one of the only key realistic alternatives to a CPPA when it comes in terms of routes that can secure long-term funding. So I think it's important as well from a customer point of view that you kind of understand what other options the generator has, and that you have an understanding of the CFD and how that works when you're thinking about offering a CPPA. And so I think finally, I guess it's just I guess probably key to call out that from a generator's perspective as well, whilst the CFD has been a really useful tool for getting projects off the ground, they happen once a year, or in this case now that it's happened, there's an 18-month gap between the two. Generators looking to generate new projects are not just going to time all of their projects to CFD rounds. Generators every month of the year are looking and are at various stages looking to green light and to build new developments. So there's plenty of opportunity between those auction rounds for consumers and businesses in particular to look to strike up deals that can supplement those generation projects which are being built via the CFD. And look, there are various reasons why certain generation schemes are unsuccessful in the CFD. It's a competitive auction, and so really from a generator's perspective, whilst the CFD is really, really useful, and like the last round AR6 was a really good example of how a lot of solar projects got funded and effectively got green lighted. If you speak to independent generators, they really value the corporate power purchase agreements as another supplementary tool for building projects. Because, for example, if you imagine you missed out on round AR6, you've then got to wait 18 months for the next chance to enter into the auction, and you might not be successful. And then if you're not successful, you have to wait another year to potentially find out whether you've been successful in the next round. So these are large gaps, but yet there are lots of projects that we need to get off the ground, and obviously especially to hit the 2030 target, it's kind of really important that generators have another route to market, despite how attractive the CFD route is as well. So I think it's important as we get into the CPPA topic in a bit more detail in a moment, to from your point of view as a large INC consumer, to understand the alternative route to markets that the generator you're looking to put in contract in place with has, so to kind of understand and be conscious of that when putting together a CPPA offer. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so And here again is another endorsement statement here from Energy UK. So most of you are familiar that they are basically one of the leading trade associations in the UK energy industry, and to to kind of emphasize the point I was just making about the important role that CPPAs play. Energy UK have made a call on government to kind of look to see how the UK government could potentially make CPPAs attractive. And again, it's all playing into this UK 2030 ambition that we're trying to get to. So, for example, just a few ideas that Energy UK put forward to the government, include ones such as the government underwriting CPPA contracts to cover off default risk. Because essentially you get that with a CFD. If a generator enters into a CFD, they've got a government-backed contract. So to make CPPAs a level playing field, that's been one idea. And another couple of other interesting ideas as well to incentivize businesses to enter into CPPAs as well is to look to see whether or not, if consumers enter into a CPPA, they could be exempt from certain costs, such as the CFD cost. So yeah, because essentially then as a consumer, you are reducing the amount of CFD incentive or subsidy that the government needs to pay out, because effectively you've allowed this project to be built without that. So therefore, as you've not put that CFD burden onto all consumers, you should be exempt. You could potentially be exempt from CFD costs. So that's quite interesting. And also maybe those that hold CPPAs to reduce their CCL bill by basically you can use them to meet your climate change agreement target. So again, that's another idea. So yeah, there are some interesting industry ideas around how we can incentivize and support corporate PPAs to become more attractive and for it to play a prominent part in building new renewable generation alongside the CFD scheme. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so let's now get into what is a CPPA and the motivations for transactions. So we could jump another slide forward, please. So here we go. Right. So okay, let's go back to basics then. So firstly, CPPA, it stands for Corporate Power Purchase Agreement. Okay, and then you have PPAs, which obviously just doesn't have the corporates. That's just a power purchase agreement. So I guess the key difference between a CPPA to a PPPA to a PPA is that with a CPPA, the primary agreement is between the customer and the generator. So in that diagram, you've got the customer in the middle, and the generator on the left, and that's the key agreement. There is then a sleeving contract to the I&C supplier, whereas a PPA is typically just made between a generator and a supplier. So there's no customer in that picture. A PPA, and I haven't got a picture of that up. I've just put the CPPA picture up, but that would just be between a generator and a supplier or wholesale trader, okay, who will then take that volume to market. And I guess other key things to point out is that under a CPPA, normally the business consumer, is buying 100% of the output of the project, especially for the embedded generation and solar generation. We have seen CPPAs struck where businesses have bought a small proportion of like a large offshore wind farm, in which case obviously they're not going to be buying 100% of the output. But those are different structures. A lot of the corporate PPAs that we're seeing struck are ones where a business is buying 100% of a certain project's output, like a solar project, and the term is often much longer than a PPA. Okay, so by term, I mean essentially it's a term of contract and a term of price fixing as well. So CPPAs are often struck at a fixed price and for 10 or 15 years. And again, that's kind of mirroring and competing what a generator could get if they entered into the CFD, which is an alternative for them for a CPPA. Whereas the PPA route of selling to, a utility, a supplier, a wholesale market, a lot of those route to market PPAs are quite often only 2 or 3 years in duration, or duration of price fixing. It's kind of more of a route to market for the liquid bit of the market. So those are some of the key differences. And on the diagram there, I've put in kind of the contractual flow. So that's the light blue over the top, and the key one is that one in the top left, which is this PPA between the generator and the consumer. But then you've got the back-to-back sleeving agreement going in there, and also I've kind of tried to put in the actual power flows, the cash flow, and the risk flows. Again, be more than, just because of the time today, I won't go through each one in detail, but would be more than happy, again, if anyone wants me to kind of step through this with them, offline at a later date, happy to do that. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so why are they becoming popular? Why are they happening? So we've talked about them being a long-term fixed price duration, so they are a material transaction. This is quite an undertaking. So a long-term material transaction is only going to happen if there are compelling benefits for both sides. And so what are these benefits? So I guess for businesses, we have a guaranteed, secure and sustainable energy supply that's fully traceable. Okay, so really important for carbon reporting, which is often a key requirement for large organizations. And then building on top of that, additionally, you're getting that additionality connection if it's a new build. So a CPPA, a new build, showcases a genuine investment in clean energy, and so obviously it holds huge social value with customers and investors. Okay, so that's kind of the additionality angle. And then finally, as we've touched on as well previously, it reduces exposure to the wholesale market. So a fixed energy price eliminates those fluctuations that we can be exposed to, and a lot of us sort of faced in 2022, 2023. So that's from a consumer side. And then from a generator side, as I've already touched on, this is really the alternative, the main alternative route for a generator to secure a long-term income stream and secure funding for projects. It's the alternative to the CFD, to the government-backed CFD. Okay, and by having this route established, it also I guess increases investor confidence, so that price security, through securing CPPAs, it drives down financing costs. It stimulates investor confidence to then look at other generation projects. So it kind of speeds up the funding and the ability for developers to scale up their development. Okay, so let's move on then. So I think those are kind of what a CPPA is and the motivations on both the customer side and also the generator side for transacting. And I think actually, sorry, one final thing I will say on this is this isn't something conceptual coming in the future, which I'm kind of pitching as like, watch out, these things might happen. CPPAs are actually fairly commonplace. So at Empower Business Solutions, we actually probably help facilitate our first CPPAs 20 years ago. So this isn't a brand new thing. They become flavor of the month and much talked about over the last couple of years, but they've been around a long time. And I was looking at some stats, and this one's a Europe-wide stat now, but 83% of all PPAs signed last year across Europe were CPPAs, as opposed to the PPAs actually just being sold straight to a supplier or a trader. And zooming in on the UK, the last quarterly stats that we had were for Q2 2025, and in the public domain, so the ones that we at least know about, there could be more. There were 8 CPPAs signed in the UK, okay, just in the quarter. So these things are actually happening month in, month out. I'm not talking about, carbon capture and storage and some, kind of like, we're hopeful to do a trial. The UK is hopeful to do one of these or a trial. They are, happening and, fairly active. Okay, so that just hopefully just brings to life what a CPPA is and the market space. So let's jump in then, if you don't mind, if we could move on a slide and have a look, given then that the CPPAs are happening, how we can actually maybe go about supporting businesses in securing a CPPA. So thank you for moving on to that. So that's exactly where I want to be. Okay. Cool. So, to supplement what I'm going to talk about for the next sort of 20 minutes or so, we'll soon be publishing a CPPA guide, and you can pre-register to receive that guide by scanning the QR code that you can see there. So yeah, we'll just leave that. I'll leave that screen on for a second, and then in a sec, I'm going to jump into how we're going about supporting businesses entering into CPPAs. So yeah, I'll just give it another 30 seconds and see if you can scan that while I have some water. Okay, cool. If you don't mind moving on then. So, right, so our approach at MBS to make the CPPA journey easier for both consumers and generators is we've created a new service which we're calling Renewable Match. Okay, so rather than just writing a guide or me coming on a webinar and just giving a few hints and tips about how best to enter into a CPPA, we've decided to go further and set up an end-to-end service to support generators and customers that wish to meet each other and enter into a PPA. Okay, so what does this service look like, and what are the key steps in putting in place a CPPA? So next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so we'll take each step in turn, going from left to right, and actually it's important as well to just the words at the bottom in terms of accepting that the end-to-end process for entering into a CPPA is often 6 months to a year, often 9 months to a year. It isn't a quick process. However, I think as we're seeing them more frequently transacted and as we learn, there's the potential there to shorten that time horizon, and we want to shorten it as well through this process and helping both customers and generators come together. So if we look over on the left-hand side, our first step is to work with you to validate your requirements and essentially see if the CPPA is a good fit for you and your sustainability and risk management aims. Okay, and importantly as well, that's kind of just checking in with you and testing across your stakeholders and making sure that you've got everyone on board. We've seen examples of procurement teams in businesses doing a really fab job in putting together a CPPA, only to find that it falls at the final hurdle internally when they take it to the board, because they often require board sign off because of the size and materiality of the commitment, and then to find that it doesn't get sign off. So really it's kind of learning through experience and just really validating the requirements. So that's the first step, and we'll support you in that process. If we both come to the conclusion that actually it's a good fit, and that there's appetite and that there's will on your side as a consumer to enter into a CPPA, we would then seek to enter into an exclusive agreement with you to run the CPPA procurement process for you. Okay, so essentially what we've done for some businesses, and we're going to continue to now, is to essentially write up your RFQ, define your CPPA requirement. We'll look at your consumption profile, we'll look at kind of different generation types and look to optimize it against your demand, and also consider with you what's an appropriate amount of volume to be committing to a fixed price over the term. We'll then run the process. So essentially, we will go out to market. We're one of the largest PPA providers in the UK, so we know the whole market. We'll go out to generators on your behalf and invite them to bid into the CPPA process based on the criteria that you've created with us. And then what we'll do is we will also help you assess the responses. So on your behalf, we'll help write your requirements. So, we are a consumer looking to, procure 30 gigawatts, per annum of renewable energy. We're interested in technology A or B. We're looking for a start date of X. We're looking for an end date of Y. You'd stipulate all the things that you are prepared to do and that you want to enter into. And then we'll take that to market. We'll run the process through our bid management team. We'll deal with all of the the questions that come in, run the process, and then we'll help assess the responses that have come in. So we will use independent evaluation tools as well, and financially model the responses, because they will be responses which obviously include pricing, looking against a number of scenarios. And we've got a third party, an independent respected partner, who'll come in and help us and help you with that process, so you can really digest and understand the responses that you've had and figure out which, if any of them, are right for you, and to help you kind of shortlist and decide, okay, here we go, this is a generator that I'd like to be matched with. We'll then provide you with contractual templates in terms of putting that PPA in place, because if you remember, in this model you are putting, as the consumer, a PPA directly in place with a generator. And again, we've got template contracts for those PPAs, which we believe are fair and equitable for both the generator and yourself. And then we'll have the sleeving contracts as well, that will then mean that if you put the PPA in place, that you can then take that power which you're now buying as the consumer and sleeve that into your supply agreement. And we'll manage the balancing and shaping costs, or firming costs as they're sometimes called in the industry. So really it is an end-to-end process, which starts with the kind of the validating that it's right to you, supporting you through the the evaluation and procurement exercise, and then into contracting. So yeah, and so we're confident that this service makes contracting CPPAs, I think, much less daunting than I think some of the market feedback that we've had to date. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so I guess in summary, we've seen healthy levels of CPPA activity over the past few years. And we've explored today in this session why that's the case. I guess for generators, it enables them to get new projects off the ground, and for customers, it's been a good fit for their energy and sustainability strategies. Yes, as I've just mentioned, it can be complex. Historically, CPPAs, when I talk about the ones that we've been doing for 20 years, they were done by only the very largest I&C customers that had very large energy teams and support systems. But as more and more have been transacted, I think there's been enough knowledge and experience built up, such that the suppliers, such as ourselves, can, I think, now help and step businesses through the process. So yeah, I think, Robin, that in terms of, the first part in the presentation, that's it for me.